Close your eyes for a moment and picture the scene. A man stands alone on a mountaintop. He is 120 years old, and by any natural logic, he should be frail, diminished, long past usefulness. But the biblical record says something remarkable about him. His eyesight had not dimmed, and his physical strength had not left him. He is fully present in body and mind, and he knows with a certainty that leaves no room for doubt that today is the day he dies. Stretched out below him, at a distance he can see but never close, is the land he has been moving toward for 4 decades. He has never once stepped foot on it, not a single time. This land was promised to him, to his ancestors, to a lineage stretching back through Jacob and Isaac all the way to Abraham, and the man who did more than any other human being to bring his people to its border will die on the wrong side of it. Behind him, spread out across the wilderness, are somewhere between 1 and 2 million people. Many of them have walked with him for years. Others were born during the journey and have never known a world that was not this long march through the desert. And before God takes him, Moses has one final thing to accomplish. He is going to speak. What follows is the longest recorded speech in the entire Bible. 3 addresses, actually, spread across 34 chapters. They cover the full arc of his people's history. They contain the most detailed legal code produced in the ancient world. There is a song Moses composed himself, and a prophecy that maps out everything that will unfold long after he is gone. This is the book Jesus reached for more than any other when Satan came to test him in the wilderness. This is the text that planted seeds growing in the legal traditions of modern democracies. This is the book that contains what scholars of Judaism have called the single most important sentence in the entire Hebrew tradition. And this is the book that most people have never genuinely understood. Before the story begins, you need to understand something about what this book actually is and why it carries the weight it does. Because if you walk away thinking Deuteronomy is just a collection of ancient regulations and religious obligations, you have missed what is actually happening here, the legal foundations of 3 of the world's most consequential democracies, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the modern state of Israel, all trace their philosophical origins to principles laid down in this book. The idea that justice must be blind, the principle that no individual, regardless of rank or power, stands above the law. The conviction that a society bears responsibility for its most vulnerable members, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, the poor. None of these ideas originated in ancient Greece or Rome. In their earliest written form, they came from a speech delivered by a dying man standing in a field on the eastern side of the Jordan River, approximately 3,400 years ago. The word Deuteronomy is Greek, and it translates roughly as second law. But that translation is actually a mistranslation. The Hebrew title of the book is Devarim, which simply means words, the words of Moses. And what Moses says in those words turns out to be one of the most transformative things ever set down in writing. Here is something that surprises most people outside of Jewish and Christian scholarship. Of every book in the Hebrew Bible, Deuteronomy is the one cited most frequently across the entire New Testament. When Satan challenged Jesus 3 separate times in the wilderness, Jesus answered each challenge with a quotation. All 3 came from Deuteronomy, not from Genesis, not from the Psalms, not from Isaiah, from the book most readers skip over. And when a religious lawyer tried to corner Jesus with a question about which commandment was greatest, the line Jesus quoted came from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. A line that every Jewish person of that era would have known since childhood. A line that Jewish communities have recited twice daily, every single morning and every single evening, for 3,000 years without interruption. The academic world has also found something in Deuteronomy that generated decades of intense scholarly debate. The book's structure matches, with extraordinary precision, the form of ancient Hittite suzerainty treaties dating to around 1400 BC. If you are wondering why that matters, here is why it is a very large deal. In the ancient Near East, treaties were not casual arrangements. They were the most binding and consequential legal instruments in existence. They determined the survival of entire nations, and they followed rigid, universally understood formulas. When a great king established a covenant with a smaller vassal nation, the document followed a specific sequence. First, the preamble, in which the great king identified himself. Then the historical prologue, reminding the lesser party of everything the great king had done on their behalf. Then came the stipulations, the laws the vassal was required to follow. After that, the blessings and curses, spelling out exactly what would happen depending on whether the covenant was honored or broken. And finally, the succession provisions, addressing what would happen when the great king was gone. Deuteronomy follows this exact structure, section by section, in the correct order, which means this book is not simply a religious text. It is a formal covenant document, a constitutional treaty between God and his people, formatted according to the most authoritative legal tradition of its day. Moses was not merely delivering farewell sermons, he was drafting a founding charter. Then there is the question of what happened to this book after Moses died. In 621 BC, during the reign of King Josiah, workers renovating the Jerusalem temple discovered a scroll hidden somewhere inside the building. The high priest Hilkiah brought it to the king's secretary, who read it and brought word to the king. When Josiah heard the scroll read aloud in his presence, he tore his robes. That was the ancient expression of absolute devastation, because the scroll made unmistakably clear that the people of Judah had been violating their covenant with God across multiple generations. They had lost the laws, they had forgotten the warnings, they had misplaced the entire thing. The majority of biblical scholars believe that scroll was Deuteronomy. Its rediscovery triggered the most sweeping religious reform in the nation's recorded history. Josiah demolished every pagan altar in the country. He reinstated the Passover observance, which had not been practiced in generations. He centralized all worship in Jerusalem. He essentially reconstructed the entire religious and legal infrastructure of the nation from the ground up, because of one recovered book. So when you engage with Deuteronomy, you are not handling an irrelevant ancient artifact. You are reading the document that has been shaping civilization, law, and faith for more than 3 millennia. But to genuinely understand what Moses is saying in those final speeches, you first need to understand who Moses was, and his story is one of the most layered and dramatic in all of human history. You likely know the broad outline. The infant in the basket, the burning bush, the plagues on Egypt, the sea opening in front of an entire nation. But the way that story is usually summarized, you miss the full complexity of who this man actually was and why his words in Deuteronomy carry the particular weight they do when you understand everything he had lived through. Go back to the beginning. The Hebrew people have been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, not 40. 400. That stretches back roughly as far in time from us as the early 17th century. Multiple generations of people who had no experience of freedom, who built cities and monuments under conditions of brutal forced labor. The book of Exodus describes their collective cry reaching God as something that accumulated across centuries, a groan of national anguish that would not stop. Into this world, a Hebrew woman named Jochebed gives birth to a son. The problem is immediate and life-threatening. Pharaoh has issued a decree ordering the death of every Hebrew infant boy thrown into the Nile. This was not random brutality. Though it was certainly brutal, it was calculated demographic policy. The Hebrew population was expanding faster than Pharaoh could control, and he responded with systematic infanticide. Jochebed hides her son for 3 months. Sit with that for a moment. 3 months of silencing a crying baby. 3 months of terror every time a footstep approached the door. 3 months of knowing that discovery meant death for both of them. When concealment is no longer possible, she does something that requires either extraordinary faith or extraordinary desperation, or most likely both. She weaves a basket from papyrus reeds, seals it with tar and pitch, places her infant son inside, and sets it floating among the reeds along the edge of the Nile. She tells her older daughter Miriam to keep watch from a distance. What happens next is either the most remarkable coincidence in Scripture or one of the most deliberate acts of divine orchestration you will ever encounter. Pharaoh's own daughter comes to bathe in the Nile. She notices the basket, she opens it, the baby cries, and something in her changes. She decides to keep him. She gives him an Egyptian name, Moses, from the Hebrew meaning drawn out, because she drew him from the water. And then Miriam, still watching from the reeds, steps forward and offers to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter agrees. The woman Miriam produces is Jochebed herself, Moses' own mother, who then receives payment from the Egyptian royal household to nurse and raise her own son until he is old enough to be brought to the palace. Let that settle for a moment. The most powerful ruler in the ancient world ordered the death of every Hebrew infant boy, and one of those boys ends up living inside Pharaoh's own household, educated in Egyptian wisdom, trained in Egyptian rhetoric and administration, walking through corridors of Egyptian power, eating at the royal table. The man who will eventually destroy Egypt's hold on the Hebrew people is being formed inside the house of Egyptian oppression. Moses grows up with the most advanced education available in the known world at that time. He speaks Egyptian. He understands hieroglyphics, Egyptian law, Egyptian religion, Egyptian military strategy. From the outside, he appears completely Egyptian. But he knows, because his mother told him during those early nursing years, that he is Hebrew. He carries 2 identities simultaneously, belonging fully to neither world. That tension is not incidental to his story. It defines him, and it is precisely that tension, that experience of being an insider who is also an outsider, that makes him uniquely suited to stand between God and a nation for 40 years. Then a single day changes everything. Moses witnesses an Egyptian official beating a Hebrew slave. He looks around. He sees no one watching. He kills the Egyptian and buries the body. The next day he tries to intervene in a fight between 2 Hebrews, and one of them says to him, "Are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realizes the news has spread. When Pharaoh hears about it and moves to have him executed, Moses runs. He leaves behind the palace, the privilege, the education, the access to power, everything, and flees to Midian, the territory in what is now northwestern Saudi Arabia. He sits down, exhausted, beside a well, alone, probably frightened, with nothing. He has moved from Prince of Egypt to wanted fugitive in the span of a single afternoon. A group of women arrives to water their father's flocks. Some local shepherds move to drive them off. Moses stands up and intervenes on the women's behalf. Their father, a Midianite priest named Jethro, invites Moses to dinner. Eventually, Moses marries one of his daughters, Zipporah, and he settles into a quiet life tending sheep in the wilderness. Here is the detail most people move past too quickly. 40 years pass. Moses spends 4 full decades as a shepherd in the desert. A man raised inside the greatest royal court of the ancient world, who had access to the finest resources and education the Near East could offer, spends 40 years watching sheep in a barren wilderness. He entered the Egyptian palace at birth and left it at 40. He entered the desert at 40 and stayed until 80. He would lead Israel from 80 to 120. His life divides into 3 equal acts of 40 years each. And the middle act, the one that looks from the outside like nothing is happening, is the act that prepared him for everything that followed. Think about what those 4 decades actually formed in him. In Egypt, he learned how power works. He understood empires, administration, the language of authority. In the desert, he learned something entirely different. He learned patience that cannot be rushed. He learned what it means to be insignificant. He learned the rhythms of leading creatures who have no idea where you are taking them and no desire to go. Every day, he found water. He found pasture. He dealt with predators. He carried the ones who could not walk. He searched for the ones that wandered off. And he did all of this for animals that had no comprehension of what he was doing or why. If that does not sound like an exact preview of what Moses was about to spend 40 more years doing with 2 million people, nothing does. Egypt gave him the skills. The desert gave him the character. Both were required for what came next. Then comes the burning bush. Moses is tending the flock near Horeb, the mountain of God, when something impossible presents itself. A bush that is burning without being consumed. The flames are real and active, but the branches are not charring. The leaves are not turning to ash. The fire does not spread, and it does not die out. Moses approaches, and a voice calls out his name from within the fire. Moses, Moses. Here I am, he answers. The voice identifies itself as the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. It tells him that the cries of the Hebrew people in Egypt have been heard and that Moses is going to go back and bring them out. What makes this moment so revealing is what Moses does next. He does not say yes. He pushes back 5 separate times. First objection, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? He is a nobody at this point, a shepherd with a criminal past and a 40-year gap in his record. What possible qualification does he have for this? Second objection, what is your name? What should I tell them when they ask who sent me? He needs a credential he can present to the people. And God answers this one directly and memorably. I am who I am. Tell them I am sent you. This is the moment the divine name is formally revealed, the 4 Hebrew letters known as the Tetragrammaton, a name so holy that devout Jewish people to this day do not speak it aloud, substituting Adonai or Hashem in its place. And the name itself is rooted in the Hebrew verb to be. God is identifying himself as the ground of existence, the one who is, who was, and who always will be. Third objection, they will not believe me. An 80-year-old fugitive shepherd showing up claiming to speak for God has a credibility problem. God responds with 3 signs. Moses' staff turns into a snake, his hand becomes leprous, and is then healed, and Nile water poured on the ground turns to blood. Fourth objection, and this one is striking. I am not eloquent. I have never been good with words. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. This is the man who will deliver the most comprehensive and linguistically sophisticated speeches in the entire Bible, who will be quoted by Jesus himself, telling God that he cannot speak well. Scholars disagree about whether Moses had an actual speech impediment or whether this was profound self-doubt. Either way, God is choosing someone who does not believe he has what the task requires. Fifth objection, please send someone else. At this point, the text says God's anger burned against Moses, but God does not abandon the commission or replace Moses. He appoints Aaron, Moses' brother, to serve as Moses' mouthpiece, and he sends Moses back to Egypt. What follows is the Exodus. 10 plagues descend on the most powerful empire in the world, water turning to blood, frogs, gnats, flies, the death of livestock, boils, hail mixed with fire, locusts that strip every green thing from the land, 3 days of darkness dense enough to feel, and finally the death of every firstborn in Egypt, from the heir of Pharaoh on his throne down to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon. The night of the Passover. The night the angel of death passed over every Hebrew household that had the blood of a lamb painted on its doorposts. The night that Jesus, 1,500 years later, would choose for his final meal with his disciples, deliberately transforming the Passover into something the whole world would come to remember. Then, the departure. Between 1 and 2 million people, along with their livestock and whatever possessions they could carry, leaving Egypt in a single night. And then the sea. With the Egyptian army closing behind them and the Red Sea blocking their path ahead, the people panic. Their words to Moses are memorable. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert?" Terrified and sarcastic in equal measure, Moses, the man who told God 5 times he could not do this, raises his staff over the water. The sea divides. Walls of water on either side, dry ground beneath their feet. An entire nation walks through. When the Egyptian army follows, the waters close. Moses has done the impossible. 400 years of slavery are over. Within 3 days, the people are complaining. 72 hours after the most dramatic display of divine power in recorded history, they are thirsty. They find water and it is bitter, and they complain about that. God provides food, a substance called manna that appears on the ground each morning like frost, and they complain about the menu. They remember the fish and cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic they had in Egypt, and they describe their current situation as having nothing but this manna to look at. They are nostalgic for slavery. They remember the food and have already edited out the chains. This pattern, romanticizing the past and refusing the future, will define them for the next 40 years. The manna itself deserves more attention than it usually receives. Every morning, 6 days a week for 40 years, bread appears on the ground. Each family gathers exactly what they need for that day. Any attempt to stockpile it results in it rotting overnight. The one exception is the day before the Sabbath, when they collect double and the surplus remains fresh. This is not just a food supply arrangement. It is a 40-year curriculum in daily dependence. Every single morning for 4 decades, the people wake up and discover whether God will provide. And every single morning, He does. You cannot hoard it. You cannot earn it. You can only receive it 1 day at a time. Moses will explain the lesson of the manna explicitly in Deuteronomy chapter 8. God humbled you and caused you to hunger and then fed you with manna to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. 1,500 years after Moses spoke those words in the wilderness, Satan tempted Jesus in a different wilderness with a similar test. And Jesus answered with this exact line from Deuteronomy. When Jesus later told his disciples that he was the bread of life, the echo of the manna in the desert was unmistakable. The bread from heaven in the wilderness was always pointing forward to something greater. But the hardest part of the Exodus is not getting the people out of Egypt. The hardest part is getting Egypt out of the people. 3 months after leaving, the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai. Moses ascends the mountain and receives the 10 Commandments. The mountain shakes. Fire and smoke engulf the summit. A trumpet sound grows louder and louder until the assembled nation trembles at the base. God speaks the 10 foundational laws aloud in the hearing of the entire people, the bedrock on which the moral philosophy of the Western world will be built across the next 3,000 years. Moses then goes up the mountain for 40 days to receive the full legal code, the detailed instructions for the tabernacle, the entire framework for the priestly system, everything the nation will need to function as a covenant community. In his absence, the people at the base of the mountain fall apart in 6 weeks. They had witnessed all 10 plagues. They had crossed the sea on dry ground. They had heard God's own voice from the mountain. They were camped directly beneath a peak that was still shaking and smoking with the divine presence. And after 40 days of waiting, they went to Aaron, Moses' own brother, and told him to make them something they could see, something they could touch, a God they could approach on their own terms, because Moses, the man who led them out of Egypt, had apparently disappeared. Aaron, in an act of stunning moral failure, collects their gold jewelry, melts it and casts it into the shape of a golden calf. The people begin dancing around it and declare, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Pause on that for a moment. These people watched God demolish the most powerful empire in the ancient world to set them free. 6 weeks later, they are worshipping a statue assembled from their own earrings. And notice the specific words they use. "These are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." They did not invent a new deity. They took the credit for what the real God had done and transferred it to an object they manufactured with their own hands. This is what Deuteronomy identifies as the core of idolatry. Not necessarily importing a foreign religion, taking what belongs to God, His actions, His glory, His credit, and reassigning it to something visible, controllable, and incapable of making demands on you. What this reveals about human nature is devastating. Witnessing miracles is not sufficient to produce lasting faith. Signs can impress, wonders can astonish, but only a sustained, daily relational engagement with God can transform a heart at its roots. This is the lesson Deuteronomy will return to again and again across its 34 chapters. Moses comes down from the mountain, sees what is happening, and in his fury hurls the stone tablets to the ground, shattering them. The covenant is broken before it has even been ratified. He grinds the golden calf to powder, mixes it with water, and makes the people drink it. Then he goes back up the mountain for another 40 days to receive replacement tablets. Eventually, the nation leaves Sinai and moves toward the Promised Land, the land flowing with milk and honey, the destination the entire journey has been building toward. They arrive at Kadesh Barnea, right at the border. Moses sends 12 spies in to scout the territory for 40 days. When they return, 10 of the 12 deliver a report designed to produce fear. Giants live there. The cities are fortified with walls. We felt like grasshoppers standing next to the inhabitants, and we looked that way to them too. 2 of the 12, Caleb and Joshua, give the opposite assessment. The land is extraordinary. It delivers everything God promised. And God is with us. This is absolutely possible. Do not be afraid. The people choose the 10. They do more than choose them. They weep through the night. They turn on Moses and Aaron. They declare that dying in Egypt or dying in the desert would have been preferable to this. They begin discussing appointing a new leader who will take them back to Egypt, back to slavery. The fear runs so deep that the chains they know feel safer than the freedom they do not. Caleb and Joshua tear their robes and beg. The land is exceedingly good. If the Lord takes pleasure in us, He will bring us in and give it to us. Do not rebel against Him. Do not fear the people of the land. Their protection has been removed. The Lord is with us. The people's response is to gather stones to kill them. Fear does not simply paralyze. When confronted by faith, it turns violent. And God responds with a sentence that will define the next 40 years. He asks how long this people will refuse to trust Him despite everything they have witnessed. And then the verdict. Not one adult who came out of Egypt, with the sole exceptions of Caleb and Joshua, will live to enter the Promised Land. They will wander this wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies spent in the land, until every person aged 20 and older is dead. 11 days. That is the distance from Kadesh Barnea to the Promised Land. The book of Deuteronomy tells us this directly. 11 days of travel. Because of fear and unbelief, 11 days became 40 years. The 4 decades in the wilderness are not 40 years of peace. They are a sustained sequence of crises. The people complain about food. God sends manna, bread, appearing from heaven every morning for 40 years. But they tire of it. They want meat, they want variety, they want what they left behind in Egypt. So God sends quail, flocks so dense they cover the ground to a depth of 3 feet. The people gorge themselves. A plague strikes down those who crave the meat. The site is named Kibroth Hattava, which means the graves of craving. Even the name is a warning about the danger of letting appetite displace trust. Then Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own sister and brother, challenge his authority directly. The Lord has spoken through us too, they say, not only through Moses. God strikes Miriam with leprosy. Moses, the man whose leadership was just undermined by his own family, falls on his face and prays for her healing. God relents after 7 days. A man named Korah leads a coordinated rebellion of 250 community leaders against Moses. His complaint sounds almost reasonable. All the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why do you elevate yourselves above the assembly? It sounds like a case for equality. God's response is not ambiguous. The ground opens up and swallows Korah and his co-conspirators, Dathan and Abiram, alive, along with their households and everything they owned. The 250 men who had offered incense are consumed by fire from the Lord. The following day, the entire congregation complains about what happened to Korah, at which point a plague breaks out that kills 14,700 people before Aaron can make atonement and stop it. There is an outbreak of venomous snakes that kills thousands more. God tells Moses to cast a bronze serpent and mount it on a pole so that anyone bitten who looks at it will live. Centuries later, Jesus would cite this specific event as a foreshadowing of his own crucifixion. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, the Son of Man must be lifted up so that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. And then comes the moment that costs Moses everything. The people are complaining about water again. God tells Moses to speak to a rock and water will flow from it. Instead, Moses, exhausted and at the end of his endurance after everything he has carried, strikes the rock twice with his staff and shouts at the people, "Listen, you rebels! Must we bring you water out of this rock?" Water pours out in abundance. The people drink. Problem solved. But God's judgment is immediate and absolute. Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not lead this assembly into the land I am giving them. One strike of a rock, one moment of frustrated public disobedience. The man who has given his entire life to this mission, who interceded for the people when God was ready to destroy them, who endured their complaints and rebellions and betrayals for 4 decades, will not cross the Jordan. He will die on the eastern side. This is the man who stands before the people in Deuteronomy, a man who has seen everything and lost everything, a man who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to gain, a man who knows he is about to die and who uses what remains of his time not in bitterness or grief but in teaching. The book opens with what scholars identify as Moses' first address, running from chapter 1 through chapter 4. And the first thing Moses does is something unexpected. He does not begin with the laws. He does not open with warnings. He starts with memory. The opening words are unusually specific. These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness east of the Jordan. Geographical coordinates are provided. A date is given, the first day of the 11th month of the 40th year, approximately 1 month before the crossing. And then Moses begins a history lesson. But this is not neutral historical recounting. Moses is doing something far more sophisticated. He is selecting and framing events to teach a specific lesson to a specific audience at a specific moment. He is not simply reporting what happened. He is saying, here is what happened. Here is what it means for you right now. And here is what you must do differently. He takes them back to Horeb, the mountain of God, and the moment God gave the order to move toward the land and take possession of it. Then he walks them through the spy mission, the failure at Kadesh, the judgment, the 40 years. Pay close attention to how Moses tells the spy story here, because it is different from how it appears in the book of Numbers. In Numbers, God instructs Moses to send the spies. In Deuteronomy, Moses attributes the initiative to the people themselves, who came and asked to send the spies. This is not an error. Moses is doing what every great teacher does, presenting the material from the angle that makes the lesson most clear for his audience. The lesson is pointed and devastating. Your parents faced a choice between faith and fear. They chose fear, and it cost them everything. You are about to face the same choice. Do not repeat what they did. Moses then references the recent military victories against Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, two powerful rulers whose territories Israel had just taken east of the Jordan. These were fresh experiences for the people listening. They were there. They fought in those battles. Moses uses them deliberately. Look at what God just did. He handed you Sihon, he gave you Og. He is going to do the same for every nation you face on the other side of the river. The same God who dismantled Egypt, the same God who fed you in the desert for 40 years, the same God who just gave you these two victories. He is already going ahead of you. What exactly are you afraid of? Then comes one of the most emotionally raw moments in the entire speech. Moses tells the people that he personally pleaded with God to let him cross the Jordan. Let me go over, he prayed. Let me see the good land beyond the river, that beautiful hill country and Lebanon. You can hear what it costs him to say this. He wanted it so badly. After everything he sacrificed, after the lifetime he poured into this mission, he simply wanted to walk across the river and stand in the land just once. God's answer is definitive and without appeal. That is enough. Do not speak to me about this matter again. Go up to the top of Pisgah and look to the west and north and south and east. Look at it with your eyes, because you will not cross this Jordan. God lets him see it. He does not let him enter it. And what does Moses do with this? He does not collapse. He does not spend his final days consumed by resentment. He tells the story plainly, without self-pity, and then turns immediately to the people and says, "Commission Joshua, encourage him, strengthen him. He is the one who will lead you across." Moses' response to being denied the thing he wanted most is to prepare the person who will have it instead. That is not a small thing. That is what happens when a man's ego has been completely burned away by 4 decades in the desert. Chapter 4 is where Moses shifts from historical memory into urgent instruction. Now, Israel, hear the decrees and laws I'm about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and go in and take possession of the land. Do not add to what I command you, and do not subtract from it. That last instruction is a remarkable piece of legal philosophy. Moses understands something that legislators in every era have struggled with. Laws drift. They get interpreted and reinterpreted across time until they become something unrecognizable from their original form. Moses is building a protection against that drift before it starts. He then makes an argument that in the context of the ancient Near East is genuinely revolutionary. What great nation has a God as near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call on him? And what great nation has statutes and laws as righteous as this entire law I am setting before you today? He is making the case that the law itself is evidence of God's character. Not just the miracles, not the pillar of cloud and fire, not the parted sea, the ethics, the care built into the legal structure for the poor, the stranger, the widow, the orphan. These provisions are themselves proof that something categorically different is at work here, because no purely human government of that era would have produced them. Then Moses addresses the golden calf episode without naming it directly. You saw no form of any kind on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore watch yourselves carefully so that you do not become corrupt and make an idol for yourselves in any shape or form. The logic is deliberate. God chose not to show himself to you visually. That was not an oversight. It was a theological decision. The moment you carve God into a shape, you have reduced him to that shape. You have placed a limit on the limitless. Any image of God will inevitably make him smaller than he is. This theological conviction that God should not be represented in physical form would go on to shape the architecture of synagogues, the theology of the Protestant Reformation, and the artistic tradition of the Islamic world. It originates here, in this argument in Deuteronomy chapter 4. Moses closes his first address with a prophecy that reads like a news dispatch written after the fact. He says, "When you have had children and grandchildren and have grown old in the land, if you act corruptly and make an idol, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today, that you will quickly perish from the land. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations." In 586 BC, 7 centuries after Moses spoke those words, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple to the ground, and deported the bulk of the Jewish population. It was among the most catastrophic events in Jewish history. Moses described it in detail before it happened, but even in that devastating prophecy, a door is left open. From there, Moses says, "You will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him when you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul, even in exile, even in judgment. The way back is always accessible." Moses' second address runs from chapter 5 through chapter 26. It is by far the longest section of the book. It covers the 10 Commandments, laws governing worship, laws governing society, commerce, family, justice, warfare, food. It is a complete legal and moral framework for an entire civilization. But it does not begin with law. It begins with relationship. Moses restates the 10 Commandments. This is their second appearance in the biblical text, the first being in Exodus. There are differences between the two versions, and those differences are significant. The most important variation falls in the 4th commandment, the one about the Sabbath. In Exodus, the justification for Sabbath observance is rooted in the creation narrative. God rested on the 7th day, so you rest on the 7th day. It is cosmic theology grounded in the structure of creation itself. In Deuteronomy, Moses adds a different reason entirely. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out with a mighty hand. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. In Deuteronomy, the Sabbath is not only about creation, it is about liberation. It is social justice encoded into the weekly calendar. Every person in your household, your servants, your animals, even the foreigners residing among you, everyone gets 1 day of rest per week. Why? Because you know what it is to have no rest. You were slaves. You lived it. Empathy written into law. The theological and the ethical fused together. This is the signature move of Deuteronomy, and it changes the texture of everything that follows. And then comes the passage, the most famous in all of the Hebrew Bible. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might." The Shema. These 2 sentences have been spoken by Jewish people twice daily for 3,000 years, every morning, every evening, without pause, through exile, through diaspora, through centuries of persecution, through the Holocaust, through everything the Jewish people have endured. These words have continued. They are written inside the mezuzah, the small case attached to the doorframe of every Jewish home, so that every person entering or leaving passes by them. They are written in the tefillin, the small leather boxes that observant Jewish men bind to their arms and foreheads during morning prayer, so the words are literally connected to the body. The rabbis teach that these should be the last words a person speaks before dying. The record of Jewish history includes countless documented cases of men and women dying with these words on their lips. Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest scholars in Jewish history, was tortured to death by the Romans. around 135 AD, and spent his final breath on the last word, Echad, meaning one. There are documented accounts from the Holocaust of men, women, and children walking into the gas chambers at Auschwitz, reciting the Shema. In the darkest moment in Jewish history, the words Moses spoke on the plains of Moab 3,000 years earlier were still the thing they held on to when there was nothing else left to hold. That is what it means for a sentence to be embedded into the daily rhythm of a people's life across 100 generations. So what does it mean at its foundation? It is a declaration of monotheism, one God. Not a pantheon of competing deities with separate jurisdictions over the sun and the river and the harvest and the war. The Shema sweeps all of that away. One God. He is over everything, and He is the God of Israel. But the Shema does not stop at theology. It immediately demands something from the hearer. Love. Not just correct belief, not just ritual compliance, not just fear. Love with the totality of what you are. Heart, soul, and strength. And, now this is one of the strangest commands in any legal code in human history. You can legislate behavior, you can prohibit murder, theft, and perjury. But can you command a feeling? Can you require love? The rabbis wrestled with this for centuries, and their answer was profound. The command to love is ultimately a command to pay attention. Pay close enough attention to who God is and what He has done. Attend to it with genuine focus and sustained memory. And love is what grows from that knowing. You do not manufacture the feeling by effort. You cultivate the conditions in which it naturally arises. The command to love is really an instruction about where to direct your attention. This is why the Shema matters as something more than a theological statement. It tells you what to orient yourself toward in a world full of competing loyalties, full of things demanding your heart and your energy and your resources. Give those to God first. When the first thing is in its proper place, everything else finds its proper alignment. The ancient rabbis debated at length what it means to love God with the heart, the soul, and the might. The heart, they concluded, meant both inclinations within you, the constructive and the destructive. Love God even with the parts of yourself that resist Him. The soul meant even at the cost of your life itself, and might the rabbis interpreted as wealth, material resources, possessions, because for some people surrendering money is more difficult than surrendering life. Moses then articulates what became one of the most influential educational philosophies in human history. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. This is not a command to attend religious services once a week. It is a command to weave faith into the texture of every ordinary moment. The dinner table, the walk to school, bedtime, the morning. Every interaction is a potential teaching moment. Every routine is an opportunity to transmit these words to the next generation. This blueprint for family and education is exactly what preserved the Jewish people and their faith through every catastrophe that followed. When empires collapsed and temples burned and populations were scattered across the earth, the words did not disappear. They were not stored in buildings that could be demolished. They were stored in families, passed from parent to child across kitchen tables and in bedtime conversations across 100 generations. Then Moses does something unusual in the context of what is essentially a motivational address. He warns them against success. He tells them they are about to enter a land already full of cities they did not build, houses containing things they did not make, wells they did not dig, vineyards and olive groves they did not plant. They are about to inherit centuries of accumulated civilization without having constructed any of it. And Moses says, "Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God. Beware of saying in your heart, 'My own power and the strength of my hands produce this wealth.'" This is one of the most psychologically perceptive warnings in the entire Bible. Moses is not condemning wealth. He is diagnosing the amnesia that prosperity tends to produce. When life is going well, human beings have a nearly irresistible tendency to credit themselves, to forget who helped them, to quietly rewrite the story of their success as a narrative about their own brilliance rather than an honest account of grace and timing and assistance from beyond themselves. Moses has watched these people for 4 decades. He knows what they do under pressure. They cry out to God, and he knows what they do in comfort. They forget him. Hardship builds dependence. Prosperity has a way of dismantling it. This cycle, faithfulness in crisis followed by forgetfulness in comfort, is not a uniquely ancient problem. It is the pattern of every civilization, every institution, every family, every individual that has ever existed. The thing that sustains you in the wilderness is the thing you stop needing in the palace, and Deuteronomy sees it coming and names it before it starts. From chapter 12 through chapter 26, Moses delivers the most comprehensive legal code in the biblical text. And here is what is genuinely extraordinary about it, especially when set alongside every other ancient law code we have recovered from the same era. Almost every law includes a reason. The Code of Hammurabi, the most famous law code from ancient Babylon, gives you the law and the penalty. That is the complete transaction. Hammurabi does not explain himself. He does not care whether you understand the reasoning. He cares whether you comply. Deuteronomy is built on a different logic entirely. Over and over Moses says, "Do this, and here is why. Do not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, because you were slaves in Egypt, and you know from the inside what oppression feels like. Do not mistreat a foreigner, because you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Leave the corners of your field unharvested, so the poor can eat, because the land ultimately belongs to God, and you hold it in trust." The law is not merely a command. It is an argument. It appeals to memory. It appeals to empathy. It appeals to identity. You know who you are. You know where you came from. Now live like it. Walk through some of the specific laws, and they are genuinely remarkable for a text written 3,400 years ago. Every 7th year, Hebrew slaves must be released, and not merely released. The text says, "Do not send them away empty-handed. Furnish them liberally from your flock and your threshing floor and your winepress. Set them up to succeed." This is a built-in economic reset mechanism, designed to prevent the permanent concentration of wealth at the top and the permanent entrenchment of poverty at the bottom. Scholars of ancient economics have found this concept extraordinary given its era. And then this, there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, open your hand wide to your brother, to the needy and the poor in your land. This is not fatalism about poverty. The point is that because need is persistent, generosity must be persistent. The ongoing existence of poverty is the ongoing justification for ongoing generosity. The obligation does not expire. Now here is where the laws become truly revolutionary. When Moses speaks these words, Israel does not yet have a king. The monarchy will not be established for several hundred years. But Moses anticipates that the people will eventually want one, and he sets down conditions. The king must not accumulate horses for himself. Do not build a military machine so powerful that it becomes your security instead of God. The king must not take many wives, so that political alliances do not corrupt his values. The king must not accumulate excessive silver and gold. Wealth must not become his identity. And then this requirement which stands out in the ancient world like a monument in an open field. The king must write out a personal copy of this law with his own hand, and he must read it every single day of his life so that his heart is not lifted up above his brothers. The king is under the law. The king serves the law. No person, regardless of the power they hold, stands above it. This is not how kingship functioned anywhere else in the ancient world. Everywhere else, the king was the law. His word was final. He was either divine himself or directly appointed by the gods with unchallengeable authority. Deuteronomy says the king is a citizen under the same covenant. He reads the same words as everyone else. He follows the same rules, and he must read them daily to keep remembering this. 3,000 years before the Magna Carta, 3,000 years before the formal articulation of the rule of law in Western political thought. It is here, in the speech of a man about to die in a field east of the Jordan. 6 cities are designated across the land as cities of refuge. If someone kills another person accidentally without premeditation or intent, they can flee to one of these cities and receive protection from the victim's family until they have received a fair trial. This is the legal distinction between murder and manslaughter, a concept that remains foundational in modern legal systems around the world. It is codified here. A single witness is not sufficient to convict anyone of any crime. A charge requires the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And if a witness is found to have testified falsely, that witness receives exactly the punishment the accused would have received. Due process, the requirement of corroborating evidence, the punishment of perjury, the principle that one accusation alone is not sufficient to destroy a person. All of this, 34 centuries ago. Even the laws of warfare contain provisions that would be remarkable in any historical context. Before battle, officers address the troops and ask a sequence of questions. Has anyone here just built a new house and not yet dedicated it? Go home. Has anyone planted a vineyard and not yet enjoyed the fruit of it? Go home. Has anyone become engaged and not yet married? Go home. And then, is anyone here afraid? Is anyone here faint-hearted? Go home, because fear is contagious, and a frightened soldier diminishes every soldier around him. This is a volunteer army. Men are excused not only for practical family reasons, but on the basis of their psychological state. In an era when every surrounding nation compelled men to fight under threat of death, Deuteronomy says, "If your heart is not in this, leave. And before besieging any city, you must first offer peace. You must give the inhabitants the opportunity to surrender. Only if they refuse may you proceed with military action. And even then, you are not permitted to cut down the fruit trees around the city. Are the trees human, that they should be besieged?" Environmental protection embedded in the rules of war in 1400 BC. Workers must be paid at the end of each day. You cannot hold their wages overnight because they are poor and depending on that payment. If you build a new house, you must install a railing around the roof to prevent anyone from falling. Building codes, safety regulations. If you see your neighbor's animal wandering loose, you cannot pretend you did not notice. You must return it. You are your neighbor's keeper, whether or not you find it convenient. Fathers shall not be executed for their children's crimes, and children shall not be executed for their fathers' crimes. Each person is legally accountable only for their own actions, individual legal accountability. Your family does not suffer the consequences of what you do. This principle would not become universal in Western legal systems for thousands of years after Moses articulated it here. You shall not distort the justice due to the foreigner, or take a widow's garment as a pledge. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt. The memory of slavery returns again and again throughout these chapters. It is the ethical foundation that holds everything else up. You have experienced suffering from the inside. You know what injustice feels like when you are the one receiving it. Therefore, do not inflict it on others. The memory of your pain is not only your history, it is your moral compass. There is also a passage about prophets that deserves close attention. Moses says, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You must listen to him, a prophet like Moses." This prophecy became one of the most debated passages in all of Jewish theology. Who was this prophet? When would he come? What would mark him? In the book of Acts in the New Testament, Peter stands before a crowd in Jerusalem after the resurrection of Jesus and quotes this verse from Deuteronomy directly, identifying Jesus as its fulfillment. The early followers of Jesus understood him as the new Moses, the one who would deliver his people not from Egypt, but from something far deeper. The connections between Deuteronomy and the life of Jesus are numerous enough to fill entire books. Jesus fasts for 40 days in the wilderness, echoing Israel's 40 years of wilderness wandering. He is tested 3 times and answers each test with a quotation from Deuteronomy. He delivers his most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, from a hillside, consciously paralleling Moses receiving the law at Sinai. He establishes a new covenant at the Last Supper, deliberately framing it in the language of the Passover, the foundational event that Deuteronomy commands Israel to remember in perpetuity. And when Jesus is asked which commandment is the greatest, he quotes the Shema from Deuteronomy chapter 6, then adds a second commandment from Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments, he says, depend all the law and the prophets. Everything Moses wrote, everything the prophets declared, it all hangs on love of God and love of neighbor. That is the summary. That is the point. Moses' third address is shorter than the second, but in some ways the most emotionally concentrated section of the book. He tells the people that when they cross the Jordan, they will stand on 2 mountains, Gerizim and Ebal, with 6 tribes on each, and the Levites standing in the valley between. And they will recite the blessings and the curses of the covenant while the whole nation responds. This is not ceremonial decoration. It is a national declaration. Every person standing there, adding their own voice to the chorus of Amen to each blessing and curse, can never claim they did not know the terms. This covenant is entered freely, publicly, and communally. Chapter 28 is the climax of the legal section. It is one of the most powerful pieces of prophetic literature in the ancient world. The first 14 verses describe the blessings that accompany covenant faithfulness. Blessed shall you be in the city. Blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will make you the head and not the tail. The blessing covers everything: agriculture, family, commerce, military strength, international standing. It is a vision of complete flourishing. Then the curses begin. They continue for 54 verses. The curses are far more detailed than the blessings. This is deliberate. The blessings sketch a vision of what could be. The curses are a precise diagnostic account of what will happen when the covenant is broken. Defeat in war, disease, famine, siege, subjugation by foreign powers, scattering among the nations. Among these nations you will find no resting place, no place of security for the sole of your foot. Scholars have long observed that these curses map with striking accuracy onto the actual subsequent history of the Jewish people. The Babylonian exile of 586 BC, the destruction of the Second Temple by Rome in 70 AD, the 2,000-year diaspora that followed. Moses describes in advance a people scattered across the earth, diminished in number, with no land they can call their own. The siege descriptions in chapter 28 are particularly harrowing. Moses describes conditions of such extremity that parents would consume their own children out of desperation. When the Babylonians besieged Jerusalem in 586 BC, and again when the Romans besieged it in 70 AD, the ancient historians record that this is exactly what occurred. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing about the Roman siege, describes scenes that read like a direct fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28. And then the scattering. The Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other. Among these nations you will find no rest, and there will be no resting place for the sole of your foot. But the Lord will give you there a trembling heart and failing eyes and a languishing soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. Night and day you shall be in dread. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people lived in exactly that condition, scattered among the nations, no homeland, subject to persecution across nearly every country in which they settled, from the pogroms of Russia to the Inquisition in Spain, to the ghettos of Europe to the Holocaust. A people living with a trembling heart and no assurance of their life, exactly as Moses described on the plains of Moab. And yet, against every historical probability, they survived. Every empire that persecuted them, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Nazi Germany, has collapsed. And the people Moses was addressing that day, their descendants are still here, still speaking Hebrew, still reading the Torah, still reciting the Shema. The survival of the Jewish people is one of the most extraordinary facts in all of recorded history. And Deuteronomy predicted both their scattering and their endurance. But Moses does not end with judgment. He ends with an open door. He says, "I am not making this covenant only with those of you standing here today. I am making it also with those who are not here, with those not yet born." Future generations, people who will live centuries and millennia from now, are included in this covenant. It is not closed to them, it is open. And then in chapter 30 comes what many scholars consider the most gracious passage in the entire book. "It is not in heaven," Moses says, "that you should need to ask who will go up and bring it down to us. It is not beyond the sea that you should need someone to cross over and fetch it. The word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so that you can do it." After pages of demanding laws and devastating curses, Moses says, "You can do this. It is not out of reach. It is not beyond you. It is right here, in your mouth and in your heart." And then comes the sentence that everything has been building toward, the central offer of the entire book. "I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live." Choose life. 2 words. After everything, the history, the laws, the miracles, the failures, the warnings, the promises, all of it converges on this. 2 options, 1 choice. Moses has laid out both paths with complete transparency. He has shown them exactly where each one leads. And then he says, "It is up to you, no coercion." God has made his case as clearly and as completely as he can. He calls the cosmos itself as witness, and then he waits for an answer. This is the model of the entire biblical relationship between God and humanity. God does not force. He persuades. He presents the evidence. He shows the options. And then he gives the most dangerous and most honoring gift he could possibly offer, the freedom to choose. Every generation since Moses has faced this same choice. Every empire, every nation, every family, every individual. The terms are always the same. The options are always the same. Life and death, blessing and curse, faithfulness and forgetfulness. The choice does not expire. It passes to the next person who has to make it. After the speeches are complete, Moses does something unexpected. He composes a song. Chapter 32 contains what is known as the Song of Moses. It is among the most ancient and most studied poems in the entire biblical text. Linguists and scholars have analyzed its vocabulary, its meter, its grammar, and many have dated it to among the earliest compositions in the biblical canon. God himself commands Moses to write this song and teach it to the people. And the reason given is extraordinary. When many evils and troubles have come upon them in later generations, this song shall confront them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten from the mouths of their descendants. The song is a fail-safe. Laws can be ignored, sermons can be forgotten, scrolls can be lost inside temple walls for centuries, as history already demonstrated. But a song works differently. It lodges in memory in a way that prose cannot match. It gets hummed, It gets repeated. It passes from generation to generation through the ear rather than the eye. It survives when other things do not. The song opens with an invocation of the cosmos as witness. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth. Moses is not addressing only the 2 million people in front of him. He is addressing the universe. May my teaching drop as the rain. May my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain on the tender grass, like showers on the herb. After 40 years of leading an ungrateful people through an unforgiving wilderness, Moses opens a song with a poet's touch, with beauty. 40 years of crisis management did not extinguish it. The song introduces one of the most important theological images in the Hebrew Bible, God as the rock. His work is perfect. All his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. This metaphor appears 8 times within a single chapter and becomes one of the most enduring images in all of Scripture. It communicates permanence, reliability, something that holds when everything around it gives way. In a world where kingdoms rose and vanished and empires dissolved overnight, God is the rock, the thing that does not move. The song recounts the entire arc of the covenant story in poetic form. God finding Israel in a desert wasteland, caring for them like an eagle, hovering over its young, spreading its wings to catch them, setting them in the heights of the land, feeding them honey from the rock, and then the betrayal. Israel grew fat and kicked. They abandoned the God who made them. They provoked him with foreign gods, but the song does not conclude in judgment. It concludes in vindication. God waits until his people have no strength remaining, until the situation is completely beyond human rescue, and then he acts. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal, and there is none who can deliver out of my hand. And the song closes with a moment that feels almost out of place in a text focused so completely on one specific people and their specific covenant. Rejoice with his people, O nations. The Gentiles are invited to rejoice alongside Israel. In a book about one particular covenant with one particular people, the final song opens the door to the whole world. When Moses finishes the song, he turns to the people one last time. Take to heart all the words by which I am warning you today, that you may command them to your children, that they may be careful to do all the words of this law. For it is no empty word for you, but your very life, not a burden, not a cage, not a checklist for a demanding God. Moses insists, this is what keeps you alive as a people, as a community, as a civilization. Without it, you do not merely break rules. You cease to be who you are. After the song, Moses pronounces individual blessings over each of the 12 tribes. Chapter 33 is called the Blessing of Moses, and it parallels the blessing Jacob delivered to his sons in Genesis. Moses has become a patriarch himself in the fullest sense, the father of a nation, and this is his deathbed blessing over each of its families. Judah, the tribe of future kings, receives a blessing for leadership. Levi, the priestly tribe, is honored for faithfulness. Benjamin is named the beloved of the Lord. Joseph's blessing runs 7 verses, so abundant that it cannot be contained in fewer. And the entire blessing closes with one of the most beautiful verses in the Bible. There is none like God, O Jeshurun, who rides through the heavens to your help, through the skies in his majesty. The eternal God is your dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. Underneath are the everlasting arms. After 40 years of carrying the most difficult people through the most impossible circumstances, Moses closes with this image. God as the ground beneath the ground. Arms that are there before you fall. A dwelling place that exists before you know you need it. These are the last words Moses speaks to the people of Israel. Chapter 34 is the final chapter of Deuteronomy. It is 12 verses long. Moses climbs Mount Nebo to the summit called Pisgah, the peak overlooking the Jordan Valley and the land beyond. And God shows him everything, all of it. Gilead as far as Dan, all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all of Judah to the western sea, the Negev, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees. God spreads it all before him like a painting stretched across the horizon. Every hill, every valley, every river. The land promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. The land Moses has been walking toward for 40 years. He can see Jericho down in the valley. He can see the hills of Judah in the distance. Somewhere out there is where Abraham built his first altar. Somewhere out there is the oak at Mamre, where God appeared to Abraham as 3 visitors. Somewhere out there, centuries from now, David will build a city, Solomon will build a temple, and Jesus will walk through streets that are not even a dream yet. Moses can see all of it and cannot touch any of it. Every leader eventually encounters this. You plant seeds you will not harvest, you build things you will never use, you prepare a future you will not inhabit. That is what faithful leadership looks like when you strip away the self-interest. It is not about what you get, it is about what you make possible for the people who come after you. And God says, "This is the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over." Then the text says simply, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And God buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day, the man who led the most significant liberation movement in the history of the ancient world, the man who argued with God and won. The man who produced the most sophisticated legal code of his era, the man who carried a rebellious, stiff-necked, ungrateful people through 40 years of desert. This man dies alone on a mountain, with no monument, no grave marker, no tomb that anyone can locate or visit, and the text says God himself buried him. The most consequential human being in the ancient world has a funeral with an audience of one. Compare this to the pharaohs. When a pharaoh died, they built a pyramid, thousands of workers, decades of labor, monuments engineered to endure for millennia. The pharaoh's body was embalmed, wrapped in linen, surrounded by gold and precious objects, placed in a sarcophagus at the center of a stone mountain, designed to outlast everything else. All of it to ensure that the pharaoh would never be forgotten. Moses, who grew up in that world, who walked those corridors, who saw those monuments being constructed, receives the opposite. No pyramid, no embalming, no monument, no tomb that anyone can locate, just an unmarked burial in a valley, performed by God himself, the location known to no one. And yet, whose name do more people know? The pharaoh who tried to kill him, or the baby he tried to drown? The people of Israel mourned Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. Then the period of weeping was ended and life continued. The final verses of Deuteronomy give us the biblical text's own assessment of this man. Not what he built, not how many people he saved, not the laws he delivered. Listen to what it says. There has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Whom the Lord knew face to face. That is his epitaph, not the miracles, not the legislation, not the leadership, the relationship. In the end, what defined Moses was not what he did for God. It was that God knew him personally, intimately, face to face. There is a Jewish tradition that says when it came time for Moses to die, his soul did not want to leave his body. Moses had spent his entire existence in service, and even at the end, he resisted the final separation. According to this tradition, God himself came and took Moses' soul with a kiss. The Hebrew phrase is mitat neshika, death by a kiss, the gentlest possible departure. As if God were saying, "You have fought enough, you have carried enough, let me carry you now." That no one knows where Moses is buried carries its own theological significance. In the ancient world, the tombs of great leaders became pilgrimage sites, places of veneration, centers of religious devotion. By concealing the location of the grave, God protected Moses from becoming the very thing Moses spent his life warning against. The man who fought idolatry his entire life is shielded from becoming an idol. Even in death, Moses belongs to God and not to the people. Moses never entered the promised land. He died with the destination visible in front of him and the border uncrossed. But the book he left behind became the foundation of 3 of the world's major religions. It shaped legal codes across civilizations he could not have imagined. It gave humanity the concept of individual dignity protected by law. It built into law the protection of the vulnerable. It placed limits on the accumulation of power. It described a God who demands justice and not merely ritual. It produced a legal system grounded in empathy rather than merely authority. When Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, the philosophical tradition he was drawing from, the idea that all people are created equal, that they possess inherent rights, that governments derive legitimate authority only from the consent of the governed, that tradition has a lineage. It runs through the Enlightenment, through the Reformation, through medieval Christian theology, through the early church fathers, and all the way back to a man in a field east of the Jordan River telling a nation of former slaves that even the king is subject to the law. When the founders of the modern state of Israel assembled in 1948 to declare independence in a building in Tel Aviv beneath a portrait of Theodore Herzl, the legal principles they were establishing drew deeply from the well Deuteronomy had been filling for 3,000 years. The return of the Jewish people to the land that Moses could see but could not enter is, in a very real sense, the completion of a story that Deuteronomy began. And that story was written by a man who stuttered, a man who fled his calling for 40 years, a man who lost his temper at the worst possible moment, a man who died on a mountaintop looking at the one thing he had wanted most and could never have. Deuteronomy ends with a death, but the book of Joshua begins immediately after with these words. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving them. The leader dies, the mission continues, it always does. Choose life.